It's Dent. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this bright sunny day in the lounge room. How you doing?
Oh, great to be here, Tom, and welcome to my living room.
Oh, mate, I'm seeing it. It's beautiful. The symmetry is astounding. You got two beautiful pictures, one of our Lord, one of the Blessed Virgin. You got some those angels over your, to me, it's your left shoulder, and you got the Infant of Prague over your right. Mate, you are armed and dangerous, and you must be ready for this conversation. You're way more ready than I am. I've got freeze number 23 for St. Louis. That's you're putting me to shame. That's the best I've got. So I'm going to have to improve on that front. But I am really looking forward today to hearing your story. So you entered, we were just talking about this off air, actually. You were baptized as a result of your parents wanting to enroll you in one of Brisbane's awesome Catholic schools, a school I'm kind of familiar with because I had some good mates that went through there. And that might be a really interesting place to start. So go on. So what was it like going to Iona?
Well, I'll start with, actually, I was just baptized to get into a Catholic school. Neither of my parents are Catholic, both non-practicing Protestants. So it was purely because it was recommended as a good school. And for the academic side of things, we'd never even thought about Catholicism as a family or anything like that. So yeah, as a school, I really loved my time there. Great school on the academic side. I think probably lacking in the faith side, but we'll probably talk about that in a minute. For me, I went to a Catholic school, but didn't learn Catholicism.
Yep.
Which unfortunately, it's
if we can just
way too many people.
Yeah, if we can just talk about the trivial part of that for a second. So it was a all boys private school. As was, I went to an all boys private school. How did you find that?
Oh, I loved it. Particularly for like the sport and just to have a great group of guys, and most of which are still my friends to this day, like 15 years on. So, and really great culture with the school. So supportive. Yeah, I don't have much bad to say about that sort of thing at the school. It was, brilliant.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's kind of tragic, and a lot of people I know find it tragic, but still to this day, some of the best years of my life, I think, were the 5 years I spent at Ipswich Grammar. Just the camaraderie, the sport, weekend sporting fixtures, your mates at lunchtime. Sounds kind of, trite, but it's not. Especially hate talking about it, but in this day where, toxic masculinity and boys being boys is kind of preyed upon by all things correct. I just look back on those years with a lot of fondness, and I enjoyed them a lot.
Yeah, we didn't have those. Well, maybe we did have those issues. We just didn't know about them. But we certainly didn't discuss toxic masculinity. I think even that's only 10 years ago. I was encouraged to be a man still. It's
how quickly has it changed? Because even a lot of institutions that I had firsthand experience with back in the day, I look at the same institutions now and I go, wow, what a cultural shift.
Yeah, exactly. And even when I look back at the school now, even the culture just within the school, like we just get the updates about what's going on and all that. Even the way that things are worded have seriously changed. It's disappointing, I think.
It is. But it's the world we live in, and our job is to, make the most of it. So, and still, my memories are fond. They were good times, and I still have a very warm place in my heart for those institutions that I think gave me an awful lot.
Yeah.
So
exactly right.
Let's talk about your Catholic experience at Iona. So, the secondary school I went to was non-denominational. Conversation for another time. Yours was Catholic, and I want to hear about what your Catholic experience was like going to a Catholic private secondary school in Queensland.
I exclusively attended Catholic schools for all of my schooling. But as I said, I was baptized just to get into the school. So it wasn't something that my parents we weren't talking about our faith life at home. I certainly didn't get any of that from my parents. So I guess the school would have been 100% responsible for my Catholic faith, but it's just unfortunate, particularly in my school, that it just wasn't really talked about. To this day, like, I can't recall a single time where we actually talked about what the Catholic Church teaches on social issues, for example. We just didn't discuss it. It was a Catholic school, but part of the Catholic Church's mission just to provide education, not necessarily to spread the faith. And Mass was said every now and then, but to be honest, I didn't understand any of the sacraments while I was at school. They were never really explained.
In your opinion, what was that the spreading of the Catholic faith something that you think was genuinely at the core of Catholic education? And these Catholic schools?
I think it absolutely should be.
The reason I ask that is because what I always found interesting was a lot of friends I had that went to Catholic schools who themselves were part of families that weren't necessarily actively Catholic. And they would always take umbrage when we were discussing Catholic issues. And I was more or less putting dogmatic positions on controversial issues. And I thought it always ironic that they, being the Catholics going to the Catholic schools, would object to me putting the Catholic dogmatic position on these Catholic issues. And I thought, how kind of ironic is that situation?
Yeah, and I've heard, like, now I've got a few friends who are Catholic school teachers, and they do get told to not talk about certain topics. They're banned talking about purgatory, for example, in one school, which I find just absolutely bizarre. But I guess they just want to avoid controversy.
Yeah.
And the church and the world are always been opposed. So,
how did you become more actively interested in Catholicism?
Yeah. So look, when I left school, I would have called myself Catholic, but in name only. I didn't understand the faith, didn't practice the faith, and never really considered it to be my faith. It was just something that was sort of a part of the school. And as soon as I left school, graduated in grade 12, I just left it all behind. And it wasn't until, must have been 10, 15 years later, that I actually started thinking about it again. And I went through a whole period where I was just looking at just in my own time thinking about, well, what's the meaning of life? I've gone through a little bit of a dark time and started looking at why people put up with suffering, like what's it all for? And reading some of the greats like Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, that kind of thing, like the stories of just the worst experiences that people have ever gone through and why they chose to go through them and not just give up.
Yep.
And that led to me going to uni and studying psychology. And like it was that serious about wanting to find out. And then started reading through the great psychologists. And eventually that was when, Jordan Peterson was just coming to prominence. And so I started looking into what he was saying, and he's a mixed bag. You take or leave what he says, but what I did really like was he did a series on the psychological significance of biblical stories, and I got right into that. And that was probably the very first time that I'd ever considered that Scripture has something to say for my life.
Yep.
And then went out, bought a Bible the next day, and started reading.
Wow.
And and then looking through Scripture, starting to understand that actually this does have something to say to my life. And then looking at, well, where did this all come from? Because it's a very strange thing to say that we've got a book that's been preserved for 2,000 years and completely intact still. You can't say that about any other document, really. And it's been responsible for founding the entire Western civilization and even most of the East as well.
Yep.
It's a very strange thing that we've actually got such a document that exists. Why has it been preserved? What's this all about? So then it ended up leading me on to actually looking into that question and thinking, well, why did the church write the Bible? Why has it preserved it for so long? And what else does the church say?
Yep. And just picking up on something that you said. So you mentioned that it was kind of this, I don't want to call it a dark night of the soul, but this, there was something that triggered religion becoming more relevant to you in your day-to-day life. And when talking to people in these interviews or just day to day, I've become a bit of a believer in it takes a trigger, a trigger event or something happening in your life to make religion relevant, to make God relevant. Because you always go, well, how can there be so many people who are so nonchalant, so blasé, so lukewarm about religion? I talk to people like yourself, and you've got these phenomenal stories, and religion has filled a space in your life, and now you've got this holistic view which gives you an awful lot of comfort and the fulfilled life, you could call it. Whereas there are so many other people who I think are very comfortable not having that life. And on their own admission, their life isn't fulfilled because they can't have fulfillment based on their own criteria. It's this cyclical waking up, living a program. It's just, doing what they do. No questions of really deep meaning. Meaning is very superficial. There's no real fulfillment. And I always wonder, what's the difference between the people who have that yearning for more and those that don't? Do you think it could be that it takes a life-changing event and maybe God gives that grace to some and not to others?
It's certainly a grace. I would say that 100% it's a grace. I think certainly for me, like when you start stripping away the things that are keeping you comfortable, things that are distracting you, things that you're enjoying, start stripping them away. What's left behind? Because those things can easily be taken away. And then if you don't have something right at your core, well, why do you continue?
Yep.
And I guess for the lukewarm, perhaps it is that there are just too many of those distractions, too many of those pleasures, that they don't need to, they don't feel the need to go and look for something more.
Because I'd say, boys are boys. And even though you went to a Catholic secondary school and I went to a non-denominational one, I'd say that the boys that form the populace of both those institutions have roughly the same nature. And it was very interesting from my perspective, and I think equally and oppositely from their perspective. We were coming across completely different creatures. I was religious and they were like, gee, that's weird. And I was coming from a, cradle Catholic background into an environment where these people trivialized religion. And I'm very close with a lot of these people today still. And they're, these are things we talk about over beer and wine all the time. But it's always fascinated me. How do you provoke that need or that occurrence that religion actually plays a pivotal role in reality?
Well, I think for me, like I wasn't always 100% set that I was going to go straight back to the Catholic Church. I did look at other denominations, Protestant denominations, and that kind of thing. But for me, I wanted a church that challenged me. And I think probably for young men, that's probably where I would aim my intentions. And I guess that's probably why the traditional movement's starting to grow as well, because we do want a church that challenges us. We want to be challenged in our beliefs and actually having to be strong in some things.
And that's a theme that JP, we'll call him JP3, Jordan Peterson, harps on about a lot. And I guess he's got a lot of clinical experience and evidence to support that proposition that young males particularly could apply to females. I don't know, but he's always talking about the young fellas, the young gents. They need to be challenged. And I guess traditional Catholicism does that because the evidence seems to suggest that there's this large scale return of young people to traditional Catholicism. But you mentioned you undertook some studies in psychology. Did you finish those studies?
No, I didn't, because I got into psychology, started working my way through it, and then found that the answers I was looking for were not within science. They were 100% in faith. So I thought, oh, this has served me well, but it's led me down a different path. So I went off and would rather be looking at theology. I'm studying education at the moment, because from my Catholic education, really prompted me to want to actually go and spread the faith properly in schools and make sure that we do have well-formed Catholic students.
Go back to Iona and clip over the ear.
If they let me back.
Sure. You mentioned that you explored some Protestant denominations. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, even just before going to Protestant denominations, just looking at, well, what does Christianity teach and why? And I'd led a life outside the church for 10, 15 years. So, I mean, obviously wasn't on board with a lot of the Catholic teachings. And so started looking into, well, what does the church teach? What do Protestant churches teach? And why is that? And for the most part, it was challenging my own beliefs about things like contraception. I thought, well, maybe the church just didn't think about this because it wasn't really a thing back then. But then actually going and reading through what the church has said, and they were very clear from day one about why we have certain beliefs. And I just couldn't argue with them because they're so coherent and so logical. And when we get to Protestant beliefs, for the most part, I think they're just watered down versions of Catholic teaching. And that's not to be disparaging to Protestants, but for the most part, any Protestant teaching, it's either copied from Catholic dogma or it's a way of trying to find a loophole from Catholic dogma.
Mm-hmm. That would make sense to me based on the limited experience I have with Protestants. You hate saying it. No, no insult intended, but
no,
it is what it is.
Definitely not. Yeah,
and it would historically make sense.
And I think, well, I mean, there's so many reasons that I would say that the Catholic Church is the one true church, and the fact that they haven't changed any teaching from the very beginning.
Yep.
It's a church that does not bend to the will of the world. Never has, never will. Mm-hmm. And I think that, for me, I mean, that you couldn't be more strong in how it teaches. But also, the Catholic Church built Western civilization. No other church can claim that.
True.
And plus built the hospitals, the universities, pretty much everything we take for granted now, even for the most part, all of the morality of half of the morality of the current world, it's all Christian dogma that comes straight from Holy Mother Church.
Yeah. The principles, ideals and morals that we stand upon to allow us to destroy our ideals.
Oh yeah,
we're all Catholic. Aquinas, and improving on the ideas of Aristotle. You go all the way back there, and people can bypass Aquinas and go back to say, it's all great Greek philosophy. But no, I think Aquinas made a number of very important little tweaks that give us the full benefit of the Greek philosophy, and not the direct version, which probably wouldn't be as palatable as the benefits we're experiencing today. But let's talk for a second about objections people would have, because you went through this and you made that that decision to investigate and pursue Catholicism in a time where the past 10, could even take it further and go 15, 20 years, there's been no shortage of public scandals, social issues, which I think could reasonably lead people to object to becoming Catholic. And a lot of people could say, it's just a crutch that people lean on because they don't want to commit. And that could be true. But at the end of the day, there have been some very big public scandals that have been horrific. And I think it's reasonable that people may have seen those and gone, how could I be a part of an organization that has committed these offenses? How did you process that? What sort of impact did those events have on you?
Well, firstly, those events, they're not excusable. You can't explain them away, and I wouldn't even try to.
Yeah.
But having said that, it doesn't change the fact that Catholic dogma is true for me. And when we talk about social issues, the church is really up against most of the degeneracy of the world at the moment. But that's nothing new for the church. It's always gone through these times. And it's been persecuted from day one. And that's biblical. It has to be persecuted, or it's not really the true church. Mm-hmm. And I think for the most part, I'm disappointed when people that call themselves Catholic don't hold to Catholic dogma. And because it's a big sacrifice to call yourself Catholic. You don't earn anything by doing that. The world's not going to like you any better. You're not going to earn yourself any easier time in the world for saying that you're Catholic. So you've got to have a reason to do so. So it always surprised me when you find, well, we've got a few world leaders that call themselves Catholic but don't practice don't believe anything the church has ever taught. It just always surprised me why someone would choose to do that.
It's interesting you say that topically. We've got a census coming up in the not too distant future, and there seems to be this fringe campaign encouraging people to not identify as religious. And a couple of very prominent people have come out and kind of lampooned it as ridiculous, which is exactly what I think that fringe campaign is. But nonetheless, it's very interesting because when you live in an extremely secular society like Australia, where there is no shortage of people who, based on the data, identify as religious, but there's no substantive religious practice to, I don't know, to give life to that religion in their lives. It's not sustainable, and it's only a matter of time before you kind of end up in a explicitly irreligious culture.
100%. Yeah. And when we look at just numbers of, just within the Catholic Church, the data's out there to show that belief in the true presence has fallen dramatically. Attendance at Mass has fallen dramatically. But yet the numbers of people who identify as being Catholic are fairly stable, slightly declining, but nowhere near as much as the declines on actual belief.
Weird world, isn't it?
Bizarre.
Currently, you attend a traditional form of the Mass. And we discussed in the past that there's a movement of young people, embracing this challenge and going to traditional forms of the Catholic Mass, etc., and really trying to live that traditional form of Catholicism. But to get to that spot in your life, you would have had to go through, I guess, what you'd call concilia or modern Catholicism to find the traditional form. And can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I didn't know tradition existed until much more recently. When I converted, I guess in terms of reverted back to the church after 10, 15 years away from it, I came back into a Novus Ordo church, so a modernist church, and was going there for only probably a few months. But I was reading on the side the works of like the Church Fathers, St. Thomas Aquinas, that kind of thing, to try and really understand what the church teaches and why. But then going to this modern mass that I still can't see how either of them actually mesh together. It never sat well with me. And through the beauty of the internet, I found that there were plenty of other people who thought the same way. And that there is such a strong traditionalist movement of moving back towards the core of the church, which is tradition. Mm-hmm. And so I managed to find my way to an indult parish that was at the traditional Latin Mass, and started to go through their catechism course and tried to actually understand, well, this is what the church teaches. It was so different from what the catechism course at the modernist parish I was at was teaching as well. It almost seems like two completely separate religions.
So when you reverted, were you attending Catholicism classes at I guess you call it a diocesan level?
Yeah.
Did I just say Catholicism level, classes? Catechism classes at a diocesan level. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Catholic teaching, but at a diocesan level through a local parish, and yeah, it just didn't line up with what the Church Fathers had said. Yep. Is what I would say. There were so many just massive gaps between traditional Catholic dogma and what the church now teaches, well, at least at that diocesan parish. And then the preaching from the pulpit was also, I could tell you about the horrors I've seen at modernist churches, but one of them was just a comedy routine that was given from the pulpit and sort of really put me off. I thought, this can't be right. This is not at all true. So
would I be safe in saying would I be safe in saying that but for the research you were doing in addition to attending those sorts of masses, services, classes, etc., your journey would have come to a stop there?
I think it would have.
That's interesting.
100%. Either it would have come to a stop or it would have led me away from the church. Mm-hmm. But through the grace of God, I found that the tradition still exists, and managed to find an indult parish that was at least saying the traditional mass. But then my journey didn't stop there, obviously. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest issue that I noticed when going back to a modern mass was just communion on the hand doesn't make sense to me. It's what I'd always seen growing up, going to a Catholic school. That was always the way things were done. But if we truly believe that this is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord, why is there such irreverence and just handing it out like you're a vending machine? It doesn't. I still can't square that one away in my head. So that led me away from that parish, because I discussed with the priests there that I just can't understand and I can't accept communion on the hand being a thing. Yeah.
How did that go down?
Oh, look, they had plenty of interventions to try and stop me from going. Well, I'm at the Society of St. Pius X now, and It's always had a colourful past.
And why did you end up there?
Purely because, well, firstly, communion on the hand. I couldn't accept that. I think there's some serious issues with the new mass, and those aren't things that are going to probably change at a diocesan level ever. Mm-hmm. I would think, particularly not with the current developments that are going on. And that led me to go to the society, but then also we've just got such a great parish here. We've got such strong priests that you know that they would put their life on the line to make sure that you got the sacraments.
Do you think there is a conflict between indults and the position. I don't want to say the SSPX in and of itself, but let's talk about the position taken by the
Yep.
SSPX, which claims to be the custodian of a traditionally Catholic philosophy, ideology, theology.
Oh, yeah, of course, there is a conflict, and I think from the people I've spoken to, because I still good friends with people at both parishes, and it's something that does come up all the time, particularly in the last few weeks when we've been discussing the new motu proprio. But it's the arguments that you get for and against. You're finding that they're from people who haven't actually gone and looked at the documents. They haven't actually investigated the issues. I actually, one of the things I remember when I was coming back to the church was Protestants trying to tell me what Catholics thought. I thought that was always so bizarre, listening to Protestants who've listened to other Protestants tell us about what Catholics thought and why it's wrong. And I think it's the same when you're looking at things like indult versus society. The arguments you're getting are from society people who have talked to other society people, have never really investigated why the indult issues exist, and then vice versa. So I think for me, I had to sit down and do my research and talk to the priests at both parishes and make sure I understood exactly what the positions were and came to a decision.
Mm-hmm. If we can talk about that issue a little bit further. Mm-hmm. So you've said that you've got a number of contacts who support, let's call them indult communities. And I know a few people, and I think an awful lot of those people, some are developing into strong friendships, and long may it continue. But as you mentioned, the recent motu proprio has really kind of thrown a spanner in the works. And what are people saying? What is the attitude and the approach taken currently in those indult communities, or what's the reaction to the Pope's recent motu proprio?
I think for most of the community, it feels like a bit of a betrayal from Rome to be attacked when you're obviously doing such great work. I mean, the parish here in Brisbane that I was at, the indult parish, they'd have to be the biggest diocesan parish in the state by far, and certainly probably the highest donating parish to the archdiocese. So it's definitely a slap in the face to them. I don't know what the internal workings or the internal politics are when it comes to what the bishop said or not said, and whether there are going to be changes. But there is definitely a culture of a little bit of worry, if not fear, about what changes are coming.
Yep.
And even in the last few weeks with lockdowns and things interfering with people getting to mass, I found there's a lot from that community that have made their way over to the society, at least for mass once or twice, because what other option do you have?
Very interesting. Going back to your personal story, have you ever experienced, since you reverted to your Catholicism, were there any big, significant stumbling blocks, either intellectually or personally, that you can speak about?
Yeah, well, I think coming back, I didn't know, let alone accept most of the church's teachings at the beginning. So for me, it was a lot of trying to, I guess, correct my own life in the ways that the church wouldn't agree with the way I was living. So that was always a big part, because I was living with a woman, and neither of us were, well, at least practicing Catholic, and that obviously had to come to an end because of the way. Well, I was going to convert, and she wasn't, and there was a very, very strong disagreement there. But also on all the other issues, I didn't accept, for example, contraception. I think probably the only thing I did accept of the church's teaching was abortion, because that one always just made sense to me. But yeah, there were so many different things, and then just one by one, I had to go and research what did the church teach, why, and can I actually continue living my life the way I do if I'm so opposed to what the church is teaching?
So I don't want to pay you an undue compliment or anything, but to me, it sounds like your inquiry was so genuine that you were certainly going to be influenced by the answers that you found at the conclusion of your
Yeah.
inquiry. So
Oh,
what I guess what I want to really hone in on was, did you ever experience conflicts of will and intellect?
I think I was given enough grace to not have so many conflicts, but
Yeah.
it was definitely difficult. It was definitely to have to humble myself and accept that what I've been doing has been so wrong and so far from what Holy Mother Church teaches that, yeah, it was difficult to say the least. And it took me quite a long time to work through.
Mm-hmm. So
But it was always progressively going towards calling myself Catholic. Even if I couldn't see it at the time, I was looking at well, for example, what St. Thomas would have said about issues, and just one by one, realizing that the way I'm acting doesn't even make sense in reason. So even if I don't end up being Catholic, what I'm doing is not working, and it's just not right.
Okay. Do you have you found since, I guess, engaging in those conflicts and making a decision to try to live a Catholic life, does that give you fulfillment? And why I'd be really interested to hear your answer on that is, a lot of people, I think, incorrectly look at Catholicism, and even if they try and engage with it intellectually, they see nothing but a lifestyle of prescriptions and prescriptions, and you can almost call it a form of stoicism, where it's do this,
Yeah.
do that. It's all cold, and you have to live your life within the confines of these rules. Whereas what they don't see is the beauty, the color, the true flourishing and fulfillment that the great Catholic writers suggest that you receive and benefit if you give it your best. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone's going to say that like fasting and penance are particularly nice things to do, but you're not going to get, well, hopefully you get the grace to enjoy it, but for most of us, it's just not going to happen. But there's a reason we do these things, and it's not for something of this world. And I think if you're looking for joy in this world, probably avoid the Catholic Church, because that's not what it's for. It's I think that yes, our goal is to be happy, but that's not necessarily going to happen in this world.
Mm-hmm.
It's that's destined for the next. So
I would take that as a step, though, in so far as we were talking about Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson's very interesting because I think he engages with a lot of supernatural transcendent themes in quite a superficial way. Like, he's going on his own journey, and, God willing, I think it's quite possible. Just watch that space to see where he ends up.
He looked like he's well on his way.
Yeah. And, here's hoping.
Yeah.
But something that I find so fascinating is he's constantly pressing upon the point that even to have terrestrial fulfillment, it's metaphysical. It's a philosophical problem. It's not material. And I found that so many things that he wrote about in his writings, or he spoke in his lectures, were teachings or principles that, at least at a really basic level, I'd had from my birth, because I had a solid Catholic upbringing through no fault of my own. It was just, I was blessed to have a couple of solidly Catholic parents who brought me up doing things like make your damn bed every day. Like, when I read about that in his book, I thought, how funny is this? Hey, mom and dad, look, you were right. just really, really simple things that give you the contrast between inner peace and material prosperity. And sure, there's a place for material prosperity, but nobody is going to argue, especially those who have experienced it, that leads to happiness. And so the only reason I raise that point is I do think, I personally think it's incorrect to look at Catholicism as a purely stoic form of living with the afterlife that you're all living for. Like, sure, that is the be all to end all, and but for that, there'd be no point in doing it. But I do think, at least I hope, that there is some sort of inner peace or material, to a degree, prosperity we experience through.
Don't get me wrong. There are definitely, well, Catholicism is true, and you do find happiness in the virtues. Actually, really great book I'm reading at the moment by Matt Fradd is St. Thomas's Secret to Happy Life, or I think it's called How to Be Happy, and it's the teachings of St. Thomas. Like, it's been with the church's tradition since the very beginning of, yes, you can find happiness through virtue. Mm-hmm. But I think, coming back to what you were saying, taking on responsibility has to be first and foremost. That's probably, if you were only to take away one thing from the gospel, it's pick up your cross and bear it. It's that far ingrained into Catholic thinking.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that you mentioned, or we discussed earlier, the return of young people, especially, to traditional forms of Catholicism? And I think that goes hand in hand. Young people wanting to be challenged, young people seeking out responsibility. And they're not doing it because they're suckers for punishment or they're masochists. They're doing it because it actually gives them some sort of substantive fulfillment. There is joy, there is happiness, there is meaning in that process.
Yeah, exactly right.
So what would your thoughts be on some of the, let's call it the most confronting challenges that young people aspiring to be faithful Catholics are facing today?
Well, the biggest issues, obviously, the ones that the church's teachings are very much opposed to what the world currently teaches, and across pretty much all social issues these days. And it's a difficult thing to take a stand on those things, and the risks are enormous. Like, you could easily lose your job for just quoting Catholic dogma. Like we saw with Israel Folau a couple of years ago. He lost his career because he said something that would not have been controversial 50 years ago. It's always been the church's teaching. So you've always got those issues. Plus, when you're talking, like, at the moment, we've got lockdowns seems like every other week. And it's like governments don't seem to understand that we value some things more than protection of our own lives. For example, like, most of the people in our parish would say that they would rather die than miss Mass on a Sunday. So,
or we hope that we would.
Well, yeah, we hope that we would. Yeah. Like, and so at some point, like, you can't be both for the world and for the civil laws and also be practicing Catholicism. It's a very, very difficult time, but it's one that I guess the church has always had, where, I mean, it's probably been through far worse, to be fair.
Yep, it has. And moving forward, what do you think is the antidote to living in this society? So somebody like yourself, you've really seen it from a broad perspective. And it's all recent enough for you to remember, I guess, what it's like not to have it in a superficial level, and then really to engage with it. If you want to sustain that lifestyle, from your perspective, what advice would you give to people to, I guess, have a flourishing Catholicism?
First and foremost, find a good community, because the fraternal support is what's going to keep you going. probably not as easy as it used to be. We're down to probably very few traditional parishes around the world at the moment, but they certainly exist. And I would say get involved in your local parish and actually talk to practicing Catholics about Catholicism. Because I think for me, if I had been, certainly in my school years, if I had been in contact with people that were genuinely practicing Catholics, probably would have had these conversations much earlier and come to the truth much earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn a lot more about the church from practicing Catholics than you can from probably a book.
Yep. It's a lifestyle that really it flourishes in when it's lived.
Yeah.
And that's, I think we all experience that in our lives when we're struggling with it personally. Just from experience, I think that maybe the most helpful thing to do is look at how you're implementing it in your life, and you go, oh, shock horror. Maybe I have dropped the ball, and you try and correct that, and then that bears its own fruit. So it quite makes a lot of sense, I think, in that regard.
Yeah.
We've spoken about Chris the Catholic, Chris the revert to Catholicism. What does Chris get up to when he's not deeply inquiring into all things Catholic? So I know that you enjoy your shooting.
Yeah, do a bit of pistol shooting. It's been a bit interrupted by lockdowns and quarantines and all this at the moment, but normally getting out there on a Saturday and having a shoot and do a bit of shotguns, clay pigeons, that kind of thing as well.
How good is that?
Yeah, happy to take you down to the range.
Mate, I'm going to hold you to that. It's a date.
Yep, done.
And you do a bit of reading?
Yeah, mostly learning Catholic theology, that kind of thing.
The big stuff.
I'm involved in a really good book club in our parish at the moment, reading St. Augustine's City of God, which I highly recommend.
Huge.
Not an easy one, but
his stuff isn't.
It's interesting when you start reading what he wrote in 1600 years ago, and he's basically talking about COVID.
Interesting.
It's,
I found his confessions, nothing new under the sun. No problems that people face that are new under the sun. No considerations that people face that are new under the sun. And the choice is kind of the same. It's just a matter of us making that choice or not making that choice, living with the consequences.
Yeah, I don't think there's any new information that you'd find in that hasn't already been covered.
Yeah, terrific. Well, Chris, it's been absolutely wonderful hearing about your story, hearing about how you reverted to Catholicism and how that ended up in living the traditional form of it, and your thoughts on the weird and wonderful Catholic environment in which we live. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me in the lounge room.
God bless you, Tom.
You too, mate. Thank you.